Good afternoon or good evening, depending where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, August the 19th, 2021. Again, sorry for the late start. I'm still wrestling with YouTube's ridiculously complicated new interface. Perhaps I will experiment with that on the weekend. I thought I would start tonight by talking about this showdown between President Biden and various governors. With reference to what happened in Little Rock in 1957. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled in Brown versus Board of Education that separate but equal schools were unconstitutional, and therefore America's schools had to be desegregated. And in Arkansas, the governor, Orville Faubus, he wasn't having this. He said this was a states' rights issue. And so Faubus, let's see, this is from honors.uca.edu, announced in televised remarks that the Arkansas National Guard would be called out to prevent the integration of Central High in Little Rock. On September 23rd, 1957, President Dwight Eisenhower ordered 1,000 federal troops into the capital city to restore order and enforce a federal court order integrating Central High School. So you had remarkable pictures of school children being surrounded by members of the 101st Airborne Division holding rifles with fixed bayonets. And I'm wondering if the United States is heading towards a similar situation. Is Joe Biden going to order the 101st Airborne to occupy the State House in Austin, Texas, or the capital of Florida? Are we going to see soldiers with fixed bayonets supervising the forced masking of children in Texas and Florida? I would not be surprised, frankly. I think that Biden, I suppose he thinks, to the extent that he can think, that he needs a win after the debacle in Kabul. This is from McClatchy's DC Bureau. President Joe Biden Wednesday said his administration is prepared to take possible legal action against governors who try to prevent local school officials from imposing universal mask mandates, throwing yet another wrench into Governor Ron DeSantis's plan to sanction Florida school districts that require students to wear masks. We're not going to sit by as governors try to block and intimidate educators protecting our children. I don't know. Maybe Americans will be forcibly vaccinated under the watchful eye of members of the 101st Airborne Division. Biden paired his statements with a new memorandum that directed the U.S. Department of Education to take additional measures to protect students returning to school, including exploring possible enforcement actions against governors who want to prevent schools from following federal guidelines. The Biden administration could intervene if governors threaten to withhold school board members' salaries, a threat DeSantis' administration has made. The move is a continuation of weeks of tension between the White House and Florida's nationally ascendant Republican governor, as the state grapples with one of the worst outbreaks of COVID-19 in the nation, and a growing number of Florida school districts imposed mask mandates in defiance of the governor's mask orders. Yes, as to why the number of cases of COVID-19 is rising, I'll get to that shortly. Yes, civil rights. Apparently, this is a civil rights issue. Is there any issue that is not a civil rights issue? This is from Ashley Oliver at Breitbart. Department of Education Secretary Miguel Cardona will continue targeting governors who have fought back against school mask mandates, warning Wednesday he plans to conduct civil rights investigations and take possible legal action against states with bans or limitations on the mandates. Cardona says he finds it astonishing that some states, such as Florida and Texas, are defying the Centers for Disease Control's mask guidance, and that those states could be violating some students' right to education by creating unsafe learning conditions. Oh, wow. That is some pretty labored reasoning. The fact that they're not adjusting based on the illness and the outcry from medical experts is astonishing, Cardona told the New York Times. But we cannot sit around. We have to do everything in our power, including civil rights investigations and even referring matters to the Department of Justice for enforcement if necessary. The CDC, per its most updated coronavirus guidance, recommends all teachers and students wear a mask in K-12 schools, regardless of vaccination status. The agency cites new evidence about the Delta variant as the reason for its mask recommendation. Yes, I'm just going to keep saying this, that remember when we were told that if we got the jab, no more masks. Remember when we were told if we got 2 jabs, no more masks. Remember that? And I'm looking at a picture of Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona speaking to students at White Plains High School, April 22nd, 2021 in White Plains, New York. Whereas, and you see in this picture that not only are all the students wearing masks, and of course Cardona is wearing a mask as well, but the students are encased in plastic bubbles. Well, they're rectangular, but you get the idea. Oh, the good piece by Henry Hogan at the American Sun. In plain sight, the regime is privileging the vaccinated population while blocking the unvaccinated from ordinary and necessary human activities. New York City recently launched the nation's first vaccine passport system, whereby indoor dining, fitness, and entertainment venues will be restricted to vaccinated persons only. Quebec, Canada's second most populous province, will require proof of vaccination for non-essential services, including gyms and restaurants. Overseas, the European Union's digital COVID certificate exempts vaccinated persons from restrictions on freedom of movement. Such intrusive and unnecessary decrees are not only a product of New York, Quebec, and the EU. Perhaps more pertinent to the average American, vaccination privileges have been extended to areas of employment and education. College campuses have extended vaccine mandates to students and staff at both public and private institutions. CNN recently fired 3 unvaccinated employees. The Critarchy has upheld the legal validity of employer-mandated vaccination in a landmark federal decision. The regime is hopeful that your means of subsistence and career preparation will be linked to your vaccination status and willingness to comply. While the vaccinated revel in their social signaling and or harmful side effects, a deeply sinister hyperpolarization against the unvaccinated has emerged. The unvaccinated are routinely blamed for new COVID outbreaks, despite evidence to the contrary. President Biden remarked that, quote, "the only pandemic we have is among the unvaccinated," unquote. The unvaccinated are scapegoated to justify new lockdown measures, which disproportionately hurt small businesses and help corporate conglomerates pushed by the nouveau powerful CDC. Biden even stated the so-called social media disinformation about the vaccine is killing people. Quite an immense charge to levy against those who rightfully contradict the rollout of the big pharma-produced vaccine. The inflammatory rhetoric and hyperpolarization pushed by the regime against the unvaccinated logically opens the door for the incitement and normalization of violence toward those who are not part of the privileged caste. This is an intended consequence, inclusive of other COVID-related aims, such as enforcing social control mechanisms, media-induced psychopathy, increasing atomization, the gigification of the economy, enhancement of corporate power across Main Street, and the consolidation of sovereign power under the guise of a medical emergency. On top of these goals, vaccine-related hyperpolarization is being used to justify violence and coercion against those with a shred of hostility to the regime. Vaccinated partisans loyal to the religion of the system can be seen expressing deep desires to perpetuate violence against the unvaccinated. These passions can range from blind rage to Schadenfreude-fueled depersoning to excluding the unvaccinated from medical facilities to outright calls for violence. While still anecdotal, these incidents point to the increasingly precarious physical safety of the unvaccinated. For the system believer, promised a return to normalcy in exchange for their uncritical compliance, the unvaccinated are the plague rats of the Black Death. Urged on by a bloodthirsty elite who are eager to enact harm on ardently stubborn insubordinates, the vaccinated are steeped in a religiously fervent hatred of those who dissent. The religion of the system requires infidels to direct anger upon. Yes, and he has pictures of a bunch of Facebook messages and tweets. That gay candle guy writes, "The rage that I currently feel for those who refuse to get vaccinated is unlike anything I've ever experienced before." Someone posted, "If we go in lockdown again and I lose my job, I'm going to find every vaccinated person and kill them." Yes, this is what someone said. This is how violent they've become. Avraham Froman tweeted, "Throw unvaxxed COVID patients out of the ICU to admit vaxxed patients. This is what needs to happen." Lars McMurtry tweeted, "The CDC should roll out a new program, get the shot or get shot. The unvaccinated need to be rounded up and lined up in front of open trenches. The choice is simple. America has had enough of their virus. We need to get back to normal life with or without them." Again, this is not me. This is someone called Lars McMurtry. And I checked, and this fellow still has a Twitter account. Our author, Henry Hogan, continues, "The intense stratification of vaccinated and unvaccinated persons, coupled with the descent into violence against dissenters, naturally leads to a new configuration of conflict." The German jurist Carl Schmitt, in his seminal 1932 book, The Concept of the Political, introduced the intuitively classic concept of the friend-enemy distinction. Any political conflict, Schmitt reasoned, is based on the creation of two diametric groups who engage in a struggle. At the conclusion of the struggle, the friends and enemies reach a somewhat amicable decision whereby they respect the wins and losses of the other side. Hostilities can be rectified, peace may be reached, and the two sides may reconcile. Using this one concept, one may suggest that the vaccinated, unvaccinated are engaging in a friend-enemy distinction. However, such a suggestion would be too generous. Schmitt criticizes distinctions created by quasi-religious violence, wherein the friend-enemy concept becomes distorted. Rather than being a mere enemy capable of reconciliation, quasi-religious violence crafts the opposition into a non-human who must be annihilated at all costs. The friend-enemy hereby morphs into a human-inhuman distinction. Inhuman enemies, unlike the traditional enemy, can be treated ruthlessly in a total war of extinction. Historical episodes of conflicts based on human-inhuman distinctions are apparent in the indiscriminate Allied firebombing of Dresden, the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the murderous economic sanctions levied against illiberal regimes. Much like a hive of wasps, the inhuman enemy can be wiped out without much remorse. It is not an exaggeration to suggest the unvaccinated are being propped up by the regime as the inhuman enemy du jour. Provoked by regime propaganda, the hyperpolarized segment of the vaccinated population increasingly dehumanizes the unvaccinated dissenter. The unvaccinated will be treated as second-class citizens rejected from mainstream institutions and employment, while being squarely blamed for the supposed extension of the COVID pandemic. Questioners of the regime's science as modern-day heretics are obstacles to be removed. Do you remember Biden's inaugural address where he called for unity? Do you remember when, immediately after the election, Biden promised to create a time to heal in America? All of these platitudinal promises are out the window, losing all the flimsy premises they relied on. There will be no depolitization or depolarization according to the regime's actions. Will the elites dethrone themselves by accelerating too fast and too hard and creating the environment for a backlash? What happens when a regime dehumanizes its own citizens and actively guts their means of subsistence? As the years continue, he concludes, and the regime reveals its fragile reliance on bare violence against dissent, the American political landscape may change drastically. Vaccine hyperpolarization and the normalization of violence against the unvaccinated may be a mere stepping stone in the regime's plan for the future. And yes, time for another 2-minute hate or 2-hour or 2-day or 2-month hate against Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is a Republican congresswoman from Georgia, who holds heterodox opinions. An increasing number of people are calling for her to be expelled from Congress. Oh, removed from office and thrown in jail forever. She is a disgusting traitor and unhinged lunatic. Yes, why? Because she disagrees with the regime, and that is no longer allowed. Jennifer Rubin, who is the Washington Post's token conservative columnist, very satirical. This is a woman who is a Hollywood lawyer. This woman was never conservative. Biden goes against MAGA governors. It's about time, she writes today. President Biden, in remarks Wednesday, warned about the threat posed from the fast-spreading Delta variant. He made clear we are now in a pandemic of the unvaccinated, and implored Americans who have not gotten shots to get the coronavirus vaccine, and praised business that are requiring vaccines for their employees. In the last week, AT&T, Amtrak, McDonald's, they all announced vaccine requirements, Biden said. Yes, and if big business is all in favor of something, you know that it must be good. More to the point, you know that it must be mandatory. Biden continue, I recently met with a group of business and education leaders from United Airlines to Kaiser Permanente to Howard University who are also doing the same thing. A good chunk of the speech, however, was devoted to excoriating Republican governors who are blocking life-saving measures and to praising local officials who are defying their state governments to keep people safe. After condemning the mob of parents who threatened, yes, would Jennifer Rubin ever refer to Black Lives Matter rioters as a mob? I don't think so. Because they are on the side of justice. The mob of parents who threatened healthcare professionals and school board members in Tennessee, he gave a shout out to school superintendents in Florida and Arizona doing the right thing in requiring masks in their schools. Then he unleashed what amounted to a threat. Yes, mentioned earlier. Biden all but called these governors child killers as he vowed to take the side of the victims of Republicans' reckless conduct, e.g. kids, parents, healthcare workers. Biden should not shy away from declaring that no self-described pro-life governor should be willing to endanger the lives of children to avoid mild inconveniences, e.g. wearing a mask. Biden and other Democrats should stick with the underlying message. Republican crackpots, according to the MAGA base, are willing to do anything to further their careers. Yes, the MAGA base. It's funny how a pandemic somehow morphed into an excuse to punish Trump voters. Curious, wouldn't you say? In keeping with a necessary effort to identify Republicans as extreme, radical, dangerous, and anti-American in their support of insurrectionists, Biden should not hesitate to hammer this message when it comes to COVID-19 or a host of other issues. How many people would have to be, thrown in prison or worse for Jennifer Rubin to be happy? Suggestions in the chat. Let's go to the chat now. Hello to Palcasso88, Dan, Anrun, William Hicks. Anrun, Kevin, how old is that picture of you and where is it taken? It is an old picture. I believe it was taken in something like 2005 or 2006 at sitting outside at a restaurant on Wharf Street, I believe it's Yates and Wharf Street in Vancouver. The restaurant's no longer there. And of course, one is no longer allowed to smoke even on patios in Victoria, because apparently the atmosphere is not sufficient protection against evil tobacco smoke. Hello to Dawn from Beyond. Mac Beck says COVID-19 is the boomers' cosplay version of World War II. They want a grand script to play out, but they don't have one, so they invented it out of a run-of-the-mill virus. Gamian says they are trying to do the same to Arizona schools. Hello to David Wright. Metal Mike says pollsters associated with the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party are polling, asking whether or not vaccines should be mandatory for all adults and whether Ford should invoke the notwithstanding clause to make this happen. Metal Mike says, I received a tip on this. I wouldn't put it past Premier Ford. Again, this guy's morbidly obese. He knows that he is at risk, considerable risk from COVID-19, and so he's determined to punish everyone in Ontario because of it. I have to go, says Metal Mike. Well, you can catch up later. Don from Beyond says, Central Florida, my eldest grandson started second grade Monday. Woohoo, no mask this year. Glad to hear it. Hello to Birkin Sultanov and Steve and Quachalango. Mary Crow says, some of these people want you dead if you don't buy even a portion of what they're selling. I've seen it in their eyes. It's kind of scary. Hello to Ann Run. They clearly want universal vaccination. Who or what will stop them? Well, apparently it's the right who are accused of succumbing to accelerationism. Since the November election, we see where the accelerationism is coming from. Hello to Kontiki Roulette, who says secession seems like the peaceful option here. Let the idiots live in their own utopia. Palcasso 88 says these are the same people who unironically called Trump and his supporters Nazis. Yeah, I'll get to the latest news about the vaccine later. Chocokin 666. Urban Planner says Egg Boy that egged Australian Senator Fraser Anning in 2019 has become an anti-vaxxer. He is being canceled despite raising $500,000 for Muslims. Hello to No Sleep Till Breezewood, Pennsylvania. Stefford Church Ladies says Kontiki Roulette. Hypoxia, my favorite mild inconvenience, says No Sleep Till Breezewood, PA. So I thought it was older because he was smoking on the patio. Yes, it was about that. It was shortly after that it became illegal to smoke outdoors, like on the sidewalk, And you know that the obviously there's no secondhand cancer risk. It's all bogus. If you read the shocking story of the EPA study on this, you'll have more details. The World Health Organization published a study in the 1990s saying, based on meta-analysis, that there was no significant risk from secondhand smoking, and then they suppressed that study. You can search for that in the London Telegraph. But obviously, sitting outside, the smoke dissipates, immediately. There's no smoky rooms outside. Meanwhile, the people in the kitchens of these restaurants, cooking things in oil, which is evaporating and, then drawn into their lungs, that has an exceedingly high cancer correlation. Okay. More on this subject. This is from Daniel Oliver at American Greatness. Biden Powercrats versus America. People who for years were considered reasonable by their friends are proving blasé about many of Joe Biden's disastrous policies, and their friends wonder why. Part of the answer is that many of Biden's newfound allies were so afflicted with Trump derangement syndrome that they lost the ability to think critically. Now the question is, have they lost the ability to think critically forever? Many of the never-Trumpers were once Republicans, and given that, should be expected to be skeptical of anything a Democrat like Biden proposed. But are they? And if not, why not? It's not just that the Biden policies are awful, it's that they are contradictory. The Biden administration is now promoting COVID vaccination passports, proof of vaccination, and will likely soon be requiring them, or at the very least urging states and businesses to require them. Requiring proof of vaccination either is or is not a good idea. But if proof of vaccination can be required for doing anything, why shouldn't proof of identity be required for voting? Oh no, we are told by the administration, voter ID laws are racist. Biden himself said that there is, quote, an unfolding assault taking place in America today, an attempt to suppress and subvert the right to vote. We are facing the most significant test of our democracy since the Civil War. That's not hyperbole, since the Civil War, unquote. Oliver comments, that's hyperbole, of course. But here's the problem. Blacks are also among the most vaccine resistant. If urging voter ID, as many on the right are doing, is considered racist, why isn't demanding vaccines for employment? Why don't people recognize the glaring inconsistency? Most civilized countries require proof of identity for voting. A majority of Americans, one poll puts the number at 81%, favor requiring a photo ID to vote. In Europe, most nations, including such bastions of progress as Germany, France, and Norway, require voters to have a government-issued photo ID in order to vote, but the Biden administration says the requirement is racist. This is ridiculous. Something else is going on. Two things, in fact. The administration wants to scare blacks into thinking whites and Republicans are racist, and not requiring a photo ID makes cheating easier. Democrats know cheating is the only way they can win elections. There is also the administration's glaring inconsistency regarding restrictions on Americans who might have the Wuhan flu, but not on illegal immigrants pouring across our southern border in record numbers, perhaps as many as 2 million of them by the end of the year. Many of them, thousands in fact, have tested positive for COVID-19, but the Biden administration doesn't give a damn. Why do the illegals get a pass, but not American citizens? Well, I think that there's an easy answer to this. Everything that the Biden administration does, every single thing, is in the aid of destroying what remains of traditional America and of hurting as much as possible the founding peoples of America. This is John Klizik, from a site called Unlimited Hangout, with a very interesting story about teachers. American Federation of Teachers sells out to Rockefellers, trilateralists, and big tech. The country's second largest teachers union heavily lobbied the CDC to not reopen schools. While they framed their efforts as health and safety focused, there is more than meets the eye to the union's push for indefinite remote learning. Well, as I say, the teacher's dream to get not just 3 months off a year, but 12 months off a year and still get paid. On May the 1st, 2021, Americans for Public Trust leaked email correspondences between the American Federation of Teachers and the CDC. Obtained through FOIA, these emails revealed how the bureaucracy of this teacher union was lobbying the CDC to roll back its school reopening guidelines. Pumping the brakes on the return to in-person learning, the AFT emails successfully petitioned the CDC to add language recommending that schools continue to provide telework and virtual teaching opportunities as alternatives to face-to-face education. The AFT also requested that the CDC add a coronavirus variant closing metric that would renege on the CDC's green light for in-person instruction at any level of community COVID transmission. by prioritizing telework and virtual teaching while seeking to reinstate COVID lockdown measures in the event of new coronavirus variants. The lobbying efforts of the AFT basically pressured the CDC into relegating schools to prolonged virtual distance learning that is outsourced to private ed tech corporations. To put it bluntly, the AFT has been attempting to sway the CDC to ratchet up COVID restrictions that perpetuate public education's reliance on big tech company privatization. These companies have been raking in record profits by selling ed tech products to schools during lockdown. In turn, just after their email exchanges with the CDC, the AFT and the National Education Association co-authored Learning Beyond COVID-19, a vision for thriving in public education, which calls for increased access to devices needed for online learning, along with increased access to virtual tutoring. Big teachers meet big tech. Marriage made in heaven. This is a sad story by Ben Cost in the New York Post, but there's something missing from it. Fedora guy Jerry Messing fights for his life after contracting COVID-19. Actor Jerry Edward Messing, the famous face of the popular Fedora guy internet meme, has been hospitalized after contracting COVID-19. The health emergency began 2 days ago after the 35-year-old Freaks and Geeks actor, who lives with his parents in Tampa, Florida, started feeling ill and struggled to breathe. While the Los Angeles native insisted he was fine at the time, his breathing problems persisted the following day, prompting his dad to give him an oxygen test, which revealed that his levels were alarmingly low. James immediately rushed his son to the hospital, where he tested positive for COVID-19 and was placed on a ventilator. The poor soul had reportedly been diagnosed with the disease in between receiving his first and second Pfizer vaccinations. Ventilator. This is a sad story, but what it doesn't mention is that Jerry Messing is morbidly obese. It's a triple chin, and obesity is critical to the understanding of COVID-19 and who it kills and who it doesn't. But of course, the media doesn't want to talk about that. We are, however, seeing, not before time, some skepticism about the science and the vaccines. This is from no less than USA Today. No, a vaccine doesn't make you Superman. Breakthrough COVID-19 cases are increasing amid Delta variant. That wasn't supposed to happen. So who is Vivek Murthy? According to Wikipedia, he's an American physician and a vice admiral in the U.S. Public Health Service Commission Corps, who has served as the 19th and 21st Surgeon General of the United States under President Obama and President Biden. He's not an American, of course. He was born in Huddersfield, Yorkshire, to immigrants from Karnataka, India. And then, after leaving England, didn't go straight to the United States, went to Canada first, and then finally to Miami. So why are we interested in this Indian chap? This is from reclaimthenet.org. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy says people have no right to spread misinformation. And I will point out once again that a great many of the people, both in Canada and in the United States, who are saying, you must do this or you must not say that, they're not Westerners. And it is only in the West where there is any kind of attachment to liberty. In the rest of the world, they simply worship power. And let's go to post-millennial. And yeah, apparently we are going to get, just hang on just a second here. This link died on me for some reason, but let me see if I could pull it up here. Toronto's University Health Network considers terminating unvaccinated workers who refuse COVID testing. And what was the, just give me, I'm sorry, I apologize for this. I mean, it shouldn't have happened. Oh, yes, Ontario to hold vaccination clinics around schools, allowing students to receive vaccine without parental consent. So, I suppose it's the trans revolution, and now COVID-19 have allowed governments to nationalize children. That the children belong to the government now, and the government knows what is best for them. And if you disagree with the government, you are a bad person. And soon enough, if it hasn't already begun, we are going to see children, seized from their parents because their parents don't want them vaccinated or masks or don't want them changing sex. And of course, this is in Ontario, which has a supposedly very right-wing government. My old friend and colleague Lauren Gunter writes in the Edmonton Sun, since last week, federal Liberal leader Justin Trudeau has been trumpeting mandatory COVID vaccines for all federal workers and vaccine passports for Canadians wanting to travel internationally. At the very least, the promise of mandatory vaccines for civil servants is nothing more than political ploy on Trudeau's part. Trudeau knows that his mandatory pledge is unenforceable. He insists there would be consequences for any civil servant resisting a double jab, but even under questioning from reporters, Trudeau couldn't say what those consequences would be. Surely he knows that legal experts, including some with his own Justice Department, have said a 100% ironclad mandate would be unconstitutional. Lauren, the Constitution means whatever the 9 unelected dictators of the Supreme Court say it means. Prostitution, it's got to be legal. Physicians killing people, euthanasia, it's got to be legal. Abortion, the Chief Justice at the time admitted at a talk at UBC Law School that there was nothing in the Constitution that mandated legalizing abortion. They just thought that it was a good idea. So I'm not as optimistic as my old friend Lauren Gunter about this. And here is a story from ndtv.com. Australia has suffered its worst day since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, with total daily cases surpassing the previous record, posted more than a year ago, as a Delta variant outbreak spreads as far as New Zealand. Wait a minute. Australia has been locked down tighter than any country in the world, with the possible exception of New Zealand. And yet, cases keep soaring. Does that sort of suggest a causal relationship? I mean, it does to me. And, skepticism from the New York Times. Well, I really wasn't expecting that. This is from Isabel Kirshner, datelined Jerusalem. Last spring, Israel's remarkably swift vaccination campaign was seen as a global model. Coronavirus infections plummeted, and electronic pass allowed the vaccinated to attend indoor concerts and sporting events, and distancing rules and mask mandates were eventually scrapped. Israel offered the world a hopeful glimpse on the way out of the pandemic. No longer. The wave of infections is rapidly approaching the levels of Israel's worst days of the pandemic last winter. The daily rate of confirmed new virus cases has more than doubled in the last 2 weeks, making Israel a rising hotspot on the international charts. Okay, so you vaccinate almost everybody, and yet the number of COVID cases explodes. Does anyone see a causal relationship there? A fourth wave of infections is rapidly approaching the levels of Israel's worst days of the pandemic last winter. The daily rate of confirmed new virus cases has more than doubled in the last 2 weeks, making Israel a rising hotspot on the international charts. Restrictions on gatherings and commercial and entertainment venues were reinstated this week, and the government is considering a new lockdown. I believe we are at war, Israel's coronavirus commissioner, Professor Salman Zarka, told a parliamentary committee on Wednesday. Oh, another martial metaphor. At war with whom? At war with a virus or at war with its own people? Scientists are still assessing how Israel's pandemic response plunged from shining example to cautionary tale, and the stunning reversal has provided a crucial test for Israel's new Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, who staked a claim for leadership partly on the strength of his manifesto, How to Beat a Pandemic. But some experts feel that Israel's high rate of infections among early vaccine recipients may indicate a waning of the vaccine's protections over time, a finding that contributed to U.S. decision Wednesday to begin offering booster shots to Americans starting next month. So yes, I'm wondering about this. So right now, Americans in various places are being threatened and punished because they don't have the 2 jabs. Is this going to be extended soon enough for people who don't have the 3 jabs or the 4 jabs or the 5 or the 6? The vaccine may be less effective at preventing infection with the highly contagious Delta variant, now the primary version of the virus in Israel. And the first cohort to be vaccinated was an older group whose immune systems may have been weaker to begin with. By June, Israelis, convinced the worst was over, had abandoned social distancing and other precautions. Everyone went about the business of trying to put the memory of a very difficult year and a half behind them, said Professor Ran Balisser, chairman of an expert panel that advises the Israeli government on COVID response. At that point in time, he said the paradigm for many was that Israel is the most vaccinated country in the world, that vaccinated people rarely become infected, that even more rarely do they become severely ill, and that basically, with very few precautions in place, the population was very close to herd immunity, all things considered. That was not a mistake. The problem, he said, was that what was true for the original virus did not necessarily hold true for future variants, coupled with waning immunity. The vast majority of Israel's older population had received 2 doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine by the end of February, and by now, about 78% of the population 12 and older are fully vaccinated. The vaccine is still believed to help prevent severe illness in those who do become infected, though some Israeli data suggests the possibility of an increased risk of severe disease among those who received early vaccinations. The number of deaths in Israel has climbed in the past month as the infection rate increased. Again, this is from the New York Times. And when you lose the New York Times, this could be the beginning of the end of this particular narrative. And let's talk about barriers. This is a story, again, from the New York Times. Those anti-COVID plastic barriers probably don't help and may make things worse. COVID precautions have turned many parts of our world into a giant salad bar, with plastic barriers separating sales clerks from shoppers, dividing customers at nail salons, and shielding students from their classmates. Intuition tells us a plastic shield would be protective against germs, but scientists who study aerosols, airflow, and ventilation say that much of the time the barriers don't help and probably give people a false sense of security, and sometimes the barriers can make things worse. Research suggests that in some instances, a barrier protecting a clerk behind a checkout counter may redirect the germs to another worker or customer. Rows of clear plastic shields, like those you find in a nail salon or classroom, can also impede normal airflow and ventilation. Under normal conditions in stores, classrooms, and offices, exhaled breath particles disperse, carried by air currents, and depending on the ventilation system, are replaced by fresh air roughly every 15 to 30 minutes. But erecting plastic barriers can change airflow in a room, disrupt normal ventilation, and create dead zones where viral aerosol particles can build up and become highly concentrated. If you have a forest of barriers in a classroom, it's going to interfere with proper ventilation of that room, said Lindsay Marr, professor of civil and environmental engineering at Virginia Tech, and one of the world's leading experts on viral transmission. Everybody's aerosols are going to be trapped and stuck there and building up, and they will end up spreading beyond your own desk. Let's go to the Daily Skeptic. Man taking legal action over prison-like conditions at government-approved quarantine hotel. How much did lockdown affect UK mobility? The mainstream narrative concerning England's national lockdowns is that each one arrested a steep upward trend in daily infections that would have otherwise continued unabated. Infections were rising, we had a lockdown, and infections started following. However, there are several reasons to doubt this narrative. To begin with, the international evidence suggests the impact of lockdowns on COVID-19 outcomes was marginal at best. They only worked in the sense of halting a nascent epidemic in a small number of geographically peripheral Western countries like Australia and New Zealand. And as we have seen, that is not even true of Australia anymore. And Brit sentenced to 6 weeks in prison in Singapore for not wearing a face mask. Well, yes, that's the kind of place Singapore is. Australia and New Zealand's zero COVID dilemma. We're publishing an original piece today by a senior executive at a pharmaceutical company setting out the choices facing Australia and New Zealand. Thanks to their misguided pursuit of zero COVID, there are no good options. Here's the opening section. There is a moment in one of the Mad Max films where Max and his band of tagalongs have successfully escaped from their pursuers and are striking out through the post-apocalyptic outback in search of the safe place, a haven of security where they hope to live out their lives in peace. After much struggle, they crest the top of an enormous dune, only to see an endless desert stretching out beyond the horizon. It is at this point that the true nature of their predicament becomes clear. Do they continue on alone into the unending sea of sand in what may be the forlorn hope of reaching the safe place? Or do they stay where they are until their pursuers inevitably catch up with them? Or do they turn around and head back into the danger, but to somewhere where they know there is water and shelter? In many ways, this is an apt metaphor for the situation Australia and New Zealand now find themselves in with respect to COVID. Having apparently successfully escaped from the pandemic, what should they do now? Do they plow on in the hope of reaching some kind of safe place, which may or may not exist? Or do they instead attempt to rejoin the rest of the world? A study by researchers at Oxford University rubbishes plans to introduce vaccine passports, as it shows that COVID vaccines do not significantly reduce transmission of the Delta variant. For the same reason, the researchers suggest herd immunity is unachievable. Again, this is from Oxford University, not some rednecks in a basement. I don't know whether that will make any difference, whether it will be rubbished as misinformation, nonetheless. But there are encouraging signs, as I say, that the narrative is collapsing. Let's go to Alex Berenson's Twitter feed. Okay. Daily deaths are up 15 times in Israel and 4 to 5 times in Britain over the same period. Something to shoot for if we could just reach their vaccine levels. Am I right? Yes, don't censor me, pretty please. Here's a unicorn and a screenshot of Israeli death data. I guess, Israel is destined to become one of those terrible outliers, like Sweden. No, nothing that happens in Israel or England could possibly be relevant to us because, as we know, the biology of people in the United States is different from the biology of people in England and in Israel in a very fundamental way. So MasterCard tells employees they have to get vaccinated, then delays the deadline. Anxiety says, just kidding, if you're not vaccinated, you can work from home. And the clowns who got vaccinated must return to the office. They tricked them all. Expect lots more of this. This move is very clever. It makes clear to the unvaccinated that they are putting their jobs at risk by staying home without forcing MasterCard to fire them all at once, while giving the company the flexibility to welcome them back if the political winds shift in the future. Governor Kate Brown, who you will remember, is America's only, first and only, bisexual governor. Go Oregon. Tweets, overwhelmingly, the Oregonians who are being hospitalized or who are dying for COVID-19 are unvaccinated. Berenson responds, sure they are, Governor. You wouldn't happen to have any current numbers, would you? In July, your state health department said around 20% of cases and deaths were in vaccinated people. That percentage is likely much higher now, using the very vax-friendly definition of vaccinated. Let's go to the chat. Okay. Okay, here we go. Kontiki Roulette says, I heard a good point. They've been using Australia to beta test products before release in the USA for decades. Look at what they're doing now in Australia. It's the beta test for the states. And Steve says, public ed remote learning is a bigger joke than in-person learning. Well, public schools in America, a great many of them, probably the majority of them, are completely out of control. But when you have someone sitting in front of a laptop, I suppose I understand that there can be some controls put in place to stop people from, looking at other tabs and, playing games or watching porn or whatever. But yes, we're supposed to have people staring at a screen for how long at a time? The whole computer experience is based on not staring at any particular window or tab for very long. We're just going back and forth, following down some rabbit hole or whatever. And this is the way the children in schools, this is how they've grown up. This constant stimulation, new things. No, but we're just going to expect that they're going to keep staring at the same screen and listening to a voice and taking something in. Obviously, it's not going to happen. We live in an over-complex society bound to collapse to a default setting, says Birkin Sultanov. Tricky Who says, my mom laid suffering on a ventilator over a year, then the insurance ran out, and just like that, dead, but you should trust for-profit medicine. Kontiki Roulette says, your little boy finishes his online lessons, and you say, let's go to the park for a kickabout. He replies in a robot voice, I'm going to play with my dolls now, parent 1. Quachulango says, Australia was the only country Americans looked up to as equal or betters in a cowboy way. We wonder who we look to next. I had a boss at University of British Columbia who was Australian. Margaret, her name was, a very nice woman. And she was from Australia, and I sometimes I'd ask questions, about Australians being great lovers of liberty, because I'd heard about Americans, moving to Australia because they believed that America had, lost its love of liberty. And she said, it's not like that. Also about Australians being so hardworking. And she told me that Australians are the laziest white people on earth. She said, try finding anyone in an Australian office on a Friday afternoon. William Hicks says, Israel is rising on the charts. They're a hit. Birkin Sultanov makes a comment about Yemenite or Yemeni women. The people who do the maintenance work in my hotel, I knew that they were Arabic because, I recognize it when people are speaking Arabic, and they are all Arabic. And I wondered, okay, where from? And then I saw a Mercedes roll out and some boss. And I looked at his vanity license plate, and it said Yemeni, rather. And then I saw another boss, maybe his brother, roll up in a different Mercedes, and his vanity license plate said Yemen with the numeral 1, so it would read Yemeni. So obviously the people who do the maintenance in my hotel are from Yemen. How they traveled halfway around the world to do that job is an interesting question. And who else do we have? William Hicks says, we just can't win. Mask, no mask, plastic barriers or not. That damn virus is thwarting us at every turn. It's sneaky, you know, we've been told that. Seriously, it's a sneaky virus. Steve says, I know what you're thinking. Did he get 6 jabs or only 5? Well, in all the excitement, I lost count. So you got to ask yourself a question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk? That's a good one. I quite like that. Don Willis, you do the Fauci vaccine and you turn yourself around. That's what it's all about. Next shot, you put your left arm out. You put your right arm out. The hokey pokey. There's a war in Yemen, egged on by the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. I'm well aware of that. Why that's any of our business in the West is an interesting question. But of course, I could say that about, practically anything. Seeing is believing. I went to a local Shaw outlet to pay my internet bill yesterday. And I noticed something that I had noticed the previous month when I was paying my bill. There is the walls of this office are covered with enormous monitors, and there are pictures or videos of supposedly typical Shaw customers enjoying the fine service provided by Shaw. Of the 10 people that I saw on these screens, only one of them might have been a white person. The other 9 were non-white. A woman wearing a Muslim face covering, 2 black kids, some Oriental people, more black people, and I had just walked by the Gap and Gap Kids in this mall where the Shaw office is located. And the 4 big pictures, the 4 big portraits at the front of the store, they were all of black people. According to the last census, black population of Canada, about 3.5%. About 1.2 million people of a population of 38 million. Now, presumably, when the census results are released, later this year or early next year, that number will have risen, I don't know, maybe as high as 5%, let's say. But the point is, there are not that many black people in Canada. There are certainly not that many black people in Western Canada, where most of Shaw's customers are. So Canada remains majority white. And of course, Victoria is overwhelmingly white, although much less so than when I moved here 20 years ago. So what's the point of this? Well, turn on your TV. I mean, if you're Canadian, look at Canadian TV and look at the people in the ads. About half of them are non-white. In a lot of commercials, like 2/3 non-white. And you see an enormous number of interracial relationships. And this is very sophisticated gaslighting, because you've heard of the Great Replacement, that thing that definitely isn't happening, but it's good that it is. This particular gaslighting by advertising agencies and by companies like The Gap and Shaw is attempting to persuade you that the Great Replacement has already happened, that majority of people in Canada are not white. So there's no point fighting against something which has already happened. Studies show that both Canadians and Americans believe that there are a lot more black people in their countries than there actually are, in the same way that surveys reveal that when people are asked, what percentage of the population is homosexual, they give, wildly inflated answer because they see so many of them on TV. In fact, television has been a gay ghetto, well, for decades. And Michael Ovitz, who was once the most powerful man in Hollywood, he was made an unperson because he pointed this out. He pointed this out. You look at television and the gay people on it, oh, they are also funny and witty and charming and intelligent and so very well dressed and essentially better than we are. And you don't think that that's deliberate? It is very much deliberate. And you even see, I guess maybe Joe Biden imbibed some of this, because what was it, a year ago, Joe Biden was lecturing us that homosexuals or alphabet people could give a lesson to straight people on the virtues of monogamy. Yes, he actually said this. So, yes, it's the gaslighting, and it is never ending. So I suppose the solution is to, cut the cable, to begin with. But as I say, I mean, everywhere that you go, you are given a visual prompting that you have already lost your countries. Well, I suppose that's harder to deal with. Speaking about loss, let's go back to Joseph Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Societies. And he is listing several of them from the past that have collapsed. The Casa Grandes. In northern Mexico, far north of Mesoamerica and a few kilometers south of the present U.S.-Mexico border, a major center was built which displays both Mesoamerican and Southwestern trappings of a centralized political integration. Beginning around 1060 AD, there was a major construction program at the regionally unique center of Casa Grandes. Various rebuildings took place until the site reached its zenith in the first half of the 13th century. At the time, it formed a massive multi-storied apartment complex surrounded by a ring of ceremonial structures that included geometric mounds, effigy mounds, ball courts, open plazas, a marketplace, and other specialized edifices. A city water system included a reservoir, underground stone-lined channels, and perhaps a sewage drain. These structures were clearly built in an economic system in which labor and building materials were hierarchically controlled. Casas Grandes was surrounded by several thousand satellite villages. It was supported by a hydraulic agricultural system and by an extensive trade network. The site contained millions of marine shells representing over 60 species, plus riccolite, turquoise, salt, selenite, copper ore, and elaborate ceramic vessels. These last have inspired a modern imitative renaissance that serves the tourist industry in the southwestern United States. Occupational specialists worked in shell, copper, and other materials. Sometime around 1340 AD, Casas Grandes' political supremacy came to an end. The site fell into disrepair. Goods were still produced in large volume, but civil construction and public maintenance ceased. Public and ceremonial areas were altered for living quarters. The dead were buried in city water canals and plaza drains. As walls crumbled, ramps were built to reach the still usable upper rooms. Casas Grandes finally burned, at which time corpses were left unburied in public places and altars were systematically destroyed. The Chicoans. The San Juan Basin is an arid upland plateau located in northwestern New Mexico. Across this inhospitable landscape are found the remains of once populous towns and villages, now utterly ruined and filled with wind-blown sand. The Chicoan Towns, while not as widely known as the Mayan cities, present a similarly compelling picture. Instead of cities overtaken by jungle, the Chicoan image is of lost towns filled with drifting sands and frequented only by desert fauna or occasional Navajo herders. The Chicoans were clearly masters of this desert, but somehow, disturbingly, they lost their mastery and the desert prevailed. The Chicoans built a series of walled stone towns called pueblos across the San Juan Basin and connected many of them by roads that traverse the desert, ascend mesas, and cross ravines. Exotic goods were imported from as far away as northern Mexico and the Pacific Ocean. Trees to roof the towns were carried up to 50 kilometers across the desert to Chaco Canyon, the center of the basin. From as early as 500 AD, this regional society thrived. Sometime around 1050 AD, however, something went wrong. Construction at towns ended, and some, then many, began to be abandoned. Trade networks declined, and the towns were scavenged for building materials. By 1300 AD, the last sedentary peoples had either left or reverted to a simple mobile lifestyle. The Chicoans were not alone among prehistoric Southwesterners in this experience. Peoples such as the Mimbres, the Jornada, and others lived through their own episodes of collapse and abandonment of settled areas. The Hohokam. The Hohokam were dwellers of the southern Arizona desert who, before their collapse in the 15th century AD, developed a complex cultural system characterized by extensive canal irrigation, public architecture, and an elaborate artifactual repertoire. The Hohokam canal systems from the Salt and Gila rivers were large and sophisticated. Modern canals around the city of Phoenix parallel this ancient pattern. The population supported by this system invested in the construction of Mesoamerican-like symbols of political integration, such as ball courts and platform mounds. After circa 1300 AD, the Hohokam began to develop a new form of architecture characterized by great houses of above-ground, multi-storied, poured adobe. The Great House at Casa Grande was situated within a 26-hectare walled compound that included many residential structures. The site of Los Muertos extended over several square kilometers. The contemporary Pima of southern Arizona appear to be the lineal descendants of the Hohokam, but at the time of European contact lacked the political centralization that was characteristic of their ancestors. The Eastern Woodlands. There are at least two cases of region-wide socio-political collapse in the prehistory of the North American Eastern Woodlands, those of the Hopewell and Mississippian complexes. The Hopewell complex developed in the last 1 or 2 centuries BC and the first 4 centuries AD in the Great Lakes riverine area of the Midwest. Hopewell is distinguished by such features as construction of large earthworks requiring mobilization and coordination of labor, complex systems of mortuary ritual, elaborate artifact forms, and importation of exotic raw materials and goods from across the eastern 2/3 of what is now the United States. Archaeological analysis reveals that Hopewell in many areas was characterized by complex, hierarchically organized societies in which segments of the economic system were controlled by elites of hereditary status. By perhaps 400 AD, however, the regional constellation of localized Hopewellian societies had everywhere collapsed. The succeeding late woodland period, circa 400 to 900 AD, is marked by a curtailment in trade, mortuary ceremonialism, public construction, and social complexity. This hiatus was terminated by the Mississippian complex, with trade, ceremonialism, public architecture, and political centralization that exceeded by far the levels of Hopewell. The most complex and best-known Mississippian polity was centered at Cahokia. Located at a confluence of major river systems in what is now East St. Louis, Cahokia is the largest archaeological site north of Mesoamerica. Cahokia contains some 120 mounds spread across 8 square kilometers, and with its outlying settlements had a population of perhaps 40,000 persons. It contains Monk's Mound, a 6-hectare, 600,000 cubic meter, 30-meter high earthwork that is the 3rd largest pyramid in the Americas and one of the largest features ever built by prehistoric peoples. A timber stockade was built around the central part of Cahokia, including Monk's Mound. Several circular astronomical observatories were built, considered by some to be wooden versions of England's famous Stonehenge and misappropriately labeled Woodhenges. There is a planned pattern to Cahokia. It was built by stratified society in which there was centralized control of resources. At least one member of the community elite was buried with human retainers and an array of imported luxury goods. After 1250 AD, activity at Cahokia declined. Some areas were converted from public to private use, and over time this center lost its regional supremacy. Some Mississippian-like societies persisted in the southeastern U.S. until European contact, but no native societies in the Midwest achieved a comparable level of complexity. And I will have more from Joseph Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Society on tomorrow's show. So let's talk about consequences and the lack of them, for they seem to have disappeared in the public sphere. And that is the subject of a piece by Sean Davis in American Mind, The American Mind at AmericanMind.org, called Moral Blackmail. Subhead, Tell Them We Do Not Negotiate with Ostracists. Sean Davis has blocked me on Twitter. He was quite a ferocious, as I recall, never-Trumper in 2016. And I think that's what led to the block. But he certainly seems to have changed his tune since then. Days after the invasion of Iraq in 2003, which was initially sold as a necessary preemptive effort to secure deadly weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein planned to use against the American people, National Review ran an op-ed by former George W. Bush speechwriter David Frum, attacking everyone on the right who opposed the war as unpatriotic conservatives. In the nearly 2 decades since it was published, the column has become something of a Rosetta Stone for deciphering the underlying motivations and mindset of the most ardent proponents of the idea that stable democracies can be imposed by military force from the top down. Like an insect captured in amber, Frum's essay is a near-perfect specimen of the neoconservative id, equal parts delusion and sanctimony. Frum attacked legendary conservative columnist Robert Novak for correctly predicting that America's foray into Afghanistan would be a futile slaughter. He attacked Pat Buchanan for correctly predicting that America's military might wouldn't be enough to overcome its ignorance of Afghanistan's culture and history. And he characterized the entire movement of conservatives who opposed the neoconservative plan to democratize the world through military conquest as Vichy apologists whose sole aim was to stand up for terrorist suicide bombers. And after tarring war opponents as Nazi collaborators, Frum transitioned to tarring anyone who opposed open borders and unchecked immigration as racist relics pining for the return of the KKK. They began by hating neoconservatives, Frum wrote. They came to hate their party and this president. They have finished by hating their country. War is a great clarifier. The paleoconservatives have chosen, and the rest of us must choose too. In a time of danger, they have turned their backs on their country. Now we turn our backs on them, unquote. Frum, who was sent packing from his perch at the American Enterprise Institute for his refusal to do much of anything in exchange for his 6-figure sinecure there, was right about one thing. War is a great clarifier. Indeed, as we have seen. And George W. Bush, of course, he was the great nation builder. And Sean Davis refers to a speech that Bush made before Congress in 2004. We also hear doubts that democracy is a realistic goal for the greater Middle East, where freedom is rare, yet it is mistaken and condescending to assume that whole cultures and great religions are incompatible with liberty and self-government. The subtext of Bush's address was no different from the overt charge leveled by Frum. If you oppose the bait and switch from defeating terrorists to nation building all over the Middle East, either because you believed it to be contrary to the purpose of the military, or you believed it was futile and doomed to failure, you were racist and xenophobic. Bush's sentiments were echoed more eloquently by the late Charles Krauthammer in a speech delivered to the American Enterprise Institute in February 2004. Krauthammer's remarks, entitled Democratic Realism, extolled the virtues of democracy promotion by force and scoffed at the idea that a liberal Western democracy in a tribal nation like Afghanistan with no history whatsoever of secular representative government would do anything but flourish. He was asked during a speech where it was written that tribic Islamic societies with no sense of national identity, akin to the American esprit de corps, that unites all people within its borders, regardless of color or creed, let alone a tradition of Western rule of law and civic order, are incapable of peaceful secular democracy. An attendee at the dinner yelled out, "The Koran!" Unfazed and apparently oblivious to the possibility of the vacuum created by forcibly deposing Saddam Hussein and other Middle Eastern leaders would lead to Islamists throughout the Middle East deposing their own governments, slaughtering Christians and apostate Muslims, overrunning American diplomatic outposts, and murdering American ambassadors, and eventually reestablishing the Islamic Caliphate. Krauthammer soldiered on. As we all now know, having witnessed the post-invasion debacle in Iraq, the disastrous Arab Spring, the premeditated murder of 4 Americans in Libya, the rise and spread of ISIS, and the ignominious fall of Kabul in Afghanistan, the utopian vision from Bush and Krauthammer was a lie. It was a lie that cost 2 decades, trillions of dollars, and tens of thousands of American lives and limbs, and it was incalculably destructive. It was an incalculably destructive lie that was sold by smearing its realist opponents as condescending, racist know-nothings who lacked both the brain and the heart to understand how the new world truly worked. The fall of Afghanistan should have shocked the architects of its failure back into reality. Instead, they've moved on as if nothing much happened at all and are now arguing that America should, nay, must, allow tens or even hundreds of thousands of Afghan refugees into America immediately. Being wrong means never having to say you're sorry. And being wrong about every failed foreign policy endeavor of this century apparently means you get to blather your way past America's worst defeat since Vietnam, so you can instead talk about the need for open borders. The solution for failing to export American democracy to Afghanistan, you see, is to import Afghanistan into America. And wouldn't you know it, the same arguments and epithets deployed against opponents of America's failed wars are now being deployed against opponents of unchecked immigration. Moral blackmail is the stock in trade of the failed internationalist. Are you concerned that people posing as refugees might be terrorists intent on killing Americans on U.S. soil? You're a racist. Are you worried that the same government immigration system that allowed the 9/11 hijackers entry to the U.S. might not be competent to judge who is and who is not a security threat? You're a xenophobe. Do you think maybe it is time for the U.S. government to focus on what is best for American citizens rather than what is best for Afghans or Syrians or Libyans or Iraqis? You're probably a Jim Crow fanatic who wants segregated water fountains. Do you think the family of the current president, via their shady business deals with corrupt oligarchs beholden to America's enemies across the globe, might be getting rich by manipulating the president's foreign policy to enrich themselves? Well, you're obviously a Russian stooge. Oh, yeah. Our gallant allies, Canada's and America's gallant allies in Afghanistan. Take the story of an Afghan interpreter told in Outlaw Platoon, the spectacular war memoir by Sean Parnell, who served as a combat platoon leader in one of the most violent parts of Afghanistan. In his book, Parnell details how one of the Afghan interpreters in his platoon, a man who had been thoroughly vetted and given access to some of the Army's closest held secrets, helped engineer an improvised explosive attack that killed one of Parnell's troops, Corporal Jeremiah Cole, and seriously injured 4 others. That interpreter, who went by the name Yusef, had also arranged for the murder of his counterpart Abdul so that Yusef would have total access to all sensitive information, such as troop movements and attack plans, which he would then pass on to America's enemies. Knowing where Abdul had been going and the road he had used to get there, Yusef's tip had allowed the insurgents to establish an ambush in time to catch Abdul on his way back to Burmel from his family's house. With Abdul dead, Yusef knew he would be promoted to head interpreter. We'd gone through 1 year in country, judging these Afghans through the prism of our own value systems, never fully grasping what we were up against, Parnell concluded. Earlier this week, Parnell shared that story on Tucker Carlson's primetime show on Fox News. Media Matters immediately responded to Parnell's story by slicing and dicing the transcript of Parnell's appearance to smear him as a racist for believing, based on his own personal experience with a vetted Afghan who murdered one of his brothers in arms, that America cannot properly vet the thousands of Afghans wishing to immigrate to America. He concludes, Sean Davis concludes, do you want to prevent the next Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya or Syria from being foisted on the American public at the cost of who knows how many decades, lives, or trillions of dollars? Stop giving them an inch. Stop kowtowing to their moral blackmail. Start telling them no. And again, you can find this fine essay at AmericanMind.org. Yes, immigrants are our moral superiors, especially the model minorities. This is from Steve Saylor's site from the Las Vegas Review-Journal. Nevada judge strikes down immigration law aimed at illegal re-entry. Judge Miranda Du is a Vietnamese refugee boat person. That seems rather relevant at the moment when the U.S. is considering taking in vast amounts of Omar Mateen's kinfolk or merely paying Pakistan to put them up in the Northwest Territories. Her order dismissed a case against a man called Gustavo Carrillo Lopez, who was indicted during the Trump administration. Besides being an illegal alien who has been deported twice before and illegally entered the U.S. at least twice, not counting his first illegal entry, which is treated as a freebie rather than a crime, Gustavo Carrillo Lopez is a convicted trafficker of meth, heroin, and cocaine. Presumably, he is a cartelista. The judge ruled that this law, by which he would be deported, was racist. Yes, as Saylor explains, in other words, Mexicans are convicted of breaking this law more often than, say, New Zealanders, because Mexicans break this law more often than New Zealanders. Du wrote, the court is not persuaded. The federal government's plenary power over immigration does not give it license to enact racially discriminatory statutes in violation of equal protection. After all, who is more famously Gandhi-like in their nonviolence than Mexican cartelistas? By Judge Du's logic, all immigration laws going back to the 1790 Act, passed by the Founding Fathers restricting immigration to white persons, are racist and therefore unconstitutional. Similarly, because laws against murder have disparate impact on blacks, since blacks make up the majority of murderers in the United States, plus the white men who passed the laws against murder were biased against black, the criminalization of murder is thus unconstitutional. Well, Steve Saylor jokes here, but it's essentially true. The elite has taken the position that black people cannot be guilty of crimes. Why? Because of white supremacy, because of entrenched systemic racism in our Western countries, that the police forces are racist and white supremacist. The justice system itself is racist and white supremacist. And in any event, what actions that to some of us would be considered outrages are justifiable responses to the torment of being black in the United States or Canada or Britain or France or wherever. So no, black people cannot be guilty of crimes, QED. And yes, so the United States kindly allows some Vietnamese woman to come to America. And what's the response? The response is, I hate you. Yeah, I hate you. And these so-called model minorities vote heavily, very heavily in favor of the Democratic Party. Yes, at Michigan Wave commented on Twitter, amazing the lack of gratitude. You let me in, but you should have let more of my co-ethnics in too. And ew, you're also white. I feel like an outsider here. It is imperative that this country resemble an international shopping mall as soon as possible. Well, in retrospect, immigrants should never have been given the vote. First-generation immigrants, at least, let alone allowed to become judges. Because essentially, a great majority of them now have no loyalty whatsoever to the countries that have kindly invited them in or allowed them to sneak in and then not be expelled. Michelle Rempel Garner I was talking about her and her extraordinary devotion to the Friends of Dorothy, up to and including lobbying the federal government to make paupers legal. Yeah, because we can't have what they do be too painful. You understand? That would be discriminatory. But Michelle Rempel Garner is not merely a friend of Dorothy's, or friend of a friend of Dorothy's. She just loves the people of the Middle and Near East. She issued a press release yesterday. The Honorable Michelle Rempel Garner, Conservative candidate for Calgary Nose Hill, issued the following statement on the vulnerable and internally displaced persons trapped in Afghanistan. We know that minorities like Hazaras, Sikhs, and alphabet people individuals are not safe in a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, nor are known collaborators, nice word choice there, Michelle, with Canada and its allies, members of civil society, and more. Okay. We cannot abandon these highly vulnerable individuals. And then there's the a bonus. Set up a special program for the most vulnerable in Afghanistan and outline plans to rescue them, similar to what conservatives requested to address the Yazidi genocide. The Yazidis are Stone Age devil worshippers from the Near East. And Michelle Rempel thought that what Canada needed was the importation of a whole bunch of Stone Age devil worshippers. I should remind you that Michelle Rempel Garner is one of Canada's leading conservatives. This is from Alessia Simona Maratta at Global News. Disgusted and angry, Justin Trudeau condemns anti-Semitic vandalization of campaign signs. The Prime Minister and Liberal leader released a statement saying he's disgusted and angry that candidates Rachel Bendayan and Anthony Housefeather had their Montreal campaign posters defaced with swastikas earlier this week. Okay. Yes, defaced by swastikas because they're Jewish. What this story does not mention, which should be fairly obvious, well, I mean, the CIJA, B'nai B'rith Canada, and the Friends of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, they don't mention it either. What kind of people are going to deface campaign signs of Jewish candidates with swastikas? Muslims are, particularly Palestinian Muslims, and those who are allies of the Palestinians and support their struggle. This has been known for years and years. The rhetorical trick was, oh, yes, Israel came out of the Holocaust, so we are going to equate Israel directly with Nazi Germany. And here's a story from the Allgemeine. Rash of anti-Semitic vandalism in Toronto. Extremely disturbing, says Canadian Jewish group after synagogue defaced. On Wednesday night, a Toronto synagogue was defaced with a swastika, marking another in a series of anti-Semitic incidents over the course of 24 hours. Previously, anti-Semitic graffiti was found on a local school, a sign denouncing anti-Semitism, and election posters for Jewish political candidates in Montreal. In the second case, the sign calling for no hate against Jews was defaced with Free Palestine, and Zionists aren't Jews. Yeah. So we know who is doing this, but nobody wants to say it because that would be Islamophobic. And the Jewish elite in Canada and the United States still insists that the importation of millions of Muslims, even from Afghanistan, which is quite possibly the most stringently Muslim country on earth, is a good thing. Well, it's not a good thing for Canada, it's not a good thing for America, and it is not a good thing for the Jews. Montreal has been a hotbed of anti-Semitic activity for decades now, centered around Concordia University, or as long ago as the 1990s. the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, was violently prevented from giving a speech at Concordia. But we don't learn any lessons from any of this anymore. So I'm going to be moving now onto Theater Thursday, and you'll just bear with me here as I open some tabs of material on this film. And before I go to the film, I'm going to go back to the chat. Okay. Half Galician says, I know some Farsi expressions. Half Galician says, Persian cuisine is excellent. Okay. Debareus says, rough years coming. Okay. Who else do we have here? My gosh, all over the world, my brother. All right. Okay. I don't really know what the chat is talking about here. Within 5 minutes of arriving in Ho Chi Minh, Saigon, I was offered sex and drugs, says Kontiki Roulette. Oscar Toe says, imagine for a moment if the GOP gave handouts to its own constituents, maybe that would be a good idea. Yes, it would be. Oh, no, we see, we couldn't do that. Why not? Well, because we're in favor of limited government. No, you're not. Stop lying to us. You're not in favor of limited government. Why are there all these affirmative action programs? Why are there all these special benefits for minorities, including ones who just got off the plane a week ago? Why does all this exist? Why is America turned into a welfare state, but a welfare state that primarily benefits the people who don't vote for your party? But the people who run the GOP currently are too stupid to figure this out. Palcaso 88 says the USA has 330 million people. It doesn't need any more. Don Willis says John Edwards was scarily good in connecting with older white females. Close call, he worried me. That guy with his hair, a man of that age with that haircut, as soon as I saw that, I thought, this guy's a phony. He's an absolute phony. And then that, let me just look this up here, because he, of course, John Edwards, his political career was self-immolated. It was just a really spectacular self-immolation. And it was because of a woman, okay? And it was a woman called Riley Hunter. It's spelled R-I-E-L-L-E, but of course pronounced Riley. She was born as Lisa Jo Druck. Now, she was hired by the Edwards campaign to document it, in video. And apparently there was no vetting of this woman, because if there were, one of the staffers would have said, hey, this woman, this Riley Hunter, do you know that she appears in novels by both Jay McNanary and Bret Easton Ellis? Well, who are they? They write about disgusting people doing disgusting things. Well, we certainly don't want that woman associated with the campaign, do we? But I thought a lot of things about John Edwards' self-immolation, but I thought if I was going to risk, my marriage, my career, and my freedom for a woman, I would expect her to be, let's say, about 50% more attractive, about 10 years younger, and about 100% less crazy. But the heart has its reasons. Isn't that what Woody Allen has told us? And Uh, I say put all of the 35-year-old Afghan teenage boys in Berkeley so they can become social workers, says Kon-Tiki Roulette. Yes, Edwards' wife, who he cheated on, had cancer. Again, Kon-Tiki Roulette. In Swedish schools, they had men with beards in classes with 14 and 15-year-old Swedish girls because you cannot vet people from failed states, which is something that, well, I mean, let's put it this way. Donald Trump understood that, but Joe Biden doesn't, and Justin Trudeau doesn't. And of course, the leaders of the Conservative Party in Canada doesn't understand that either. But let's talk about something else now. Our movie this week is called Umberto D, and it is from 1952. It is directed by Vittorio De Sica, and it is written by Cesare Zavattini. A few words about Vittorio De Sica. I was a giant of 20th century film, both as an actor and as a director. And he made many films which are considered among the greatest ever made, including Shoeshine, Ladri de Bicyclette, or Bicycle Thieves, which I talked about previously on Theater Thursday, Miracle in Milan, Two Women, Marriage Italian Style, The Garden of the Finzi Continis. This film, Umberto D, is characterized as neo-realism, which was a movement that flourished after at the end of the Second World War. And I suppose it was a reaction to the stunted condition of Italy at the time, but also to the grandiosity of the film that had been made while Italy was ruled by the fascists. They liked, Mussolini, the other fascists, like big spectacles. And so the neorealists decided to go small in reaction to this. And one of the neorealist techniques is the use of non-professional actors. Because of a reaction, you see this with Robert Bresson as well. He couldn't be characterized as a neorealist, but just as a reaction against actorly excess, that putting the whole movie on the weight of an actor or several actors. Well, it's just films become unbalanced. That's the way they saw it. And I'll give you an example. There's a saying in the industry that if you cast Jack Nicholson in a movie, you're going to get a Jack Nicholson movie. He has such a big performance. And I could say similarly, this is my own coinage, if you put Jennifer Jason Leigh in a movie, it's going to be a Jennifer Jason Leigh movie. Again, it's just such a big personality. Umberto D, it is the name of our protagonist, Umberto Domenico Ferrari. And he is a retired civil servant who worked for 30 years for the Ministry of Public Works. We see him first. He's just one of a crowd who is demonstrating, demanding that the government raise pensions. And this demonstration is met by the police, who, it's met by an official who informs them that they do not have a permit for this demonstration, which causes consternation amongst some of the people there. And then the army shows up and tells them to get out. And we see them being chased down the streets by soldiers in jeeps who are yelling insults at them. And then we see an old man wearing a suit and a tie and a hat, and he has a dog. And he begins to tell his story about how he desperately needs the pension to be increased because he can't make a go of his life on what he gets. He is overdue on his rent, 15,000 lira. And he explains that, if there was an increase, a specific increase in the pension, that he could retire his debts. Now, this brings up an interesting point, because other people that he talks to after the protest is forcibly ended, they say they have no debts, but Umberto D does. Yes, he says, I have no one, no son or brother to help me out. I'm just a good-for-nothing old man. Now, how he managed to have these debts is not explained. One might suspect, seeing the movie, that perhaps it's his fondness for clothing and shoes. We see some evidence of this. Perhaps he's just sort of generally feckless. We don't know whether he's ever had any children, whether he was ever married. The fact that he says that he's been living in that same apartment for 20 years rather suggests, well, that he certainly wasn't married at the time that he moved in. Umberto D, he is not, he has his faults. Let's put it this way. There is the suggestion that, as I said, that he is feckless, that he has been irresponsible. He argues that he has his rights and that he cannot legally be forced out of his apartment by his landlady, and that he is certain that he will prevail if it comes to it. But we see that he makes no efforts to get the courts involved in this question. None whatsoever. Perhaps he believes that the force of his personality will lead to his victory. But he's really not all that forceful a person, as we learn. Now, his landlady, I should mention that the old man, the pensioner, he was played by a man called Carlo Battisti, who was a linguistics professor. It was the only movie role that he ever had. Now, the landlady is played by an actress called Lina Gennari, who is a singer as well, an operetta singer. And what a formidable villain she is. She is quite a tall woman, tall, buxom woman who is supremely confident in herself. We see her many times walking down the corridor, swinging her hips. She considers herself something of an artist, and she has soirees in her apartments. And she's a middle-aged woman, but she has many suitors. And finally, she accepts the offer of marriage from a man who owns a cinema. So she'll be definitely part of the artistic world after the marriage. And the end of the war and the end of the war was very bad for most Italians. But it seems to have been quite good for her. But she has low morals. Let's put it this way. After Umberto comes back from the protest, he finds that the door to his apartment is locked. He hammers on the door and nothing happens. And he looks through a keyhole and he sees a man, an older man, and a younger woman in his bed. the landlady has turned the apartment into a kind of part-time brothel. And Umberto, who is not a Catholic as far as we can see, but he appears to be a very conservative man, is absolutely outraged by this. And he runs states with the landlady. And the response is that, well, you're going to be out of here soon anyway. What difference does it make? It turns out she is renting out on a temporary business several of the rooms in the apartment that she owns. And I have to say that this movie, unlike, say, Bicycle Thieves, was not a financial success. It was a box office disaster. And it was attacked from both the right and the left. It was attacked by no less than Andreotti, the leader of the Christian Democrats, who was prime minister, 9 times or something like that. And it was attacked by the Communist Party as well. Andreotti and the right attacked it because, it was showing Italy's faults to the world. We see the woman who was whoring herself in Umberto's apartment later. It turns out she's a mother who has 2 children, and I suppose the suggestion that a married woman with 2 children would resort to prostitution, scandalous to Italy. That not enough hope, apparently, from this movie. Not enough hope in terms of Italian patriotism. Not enough hope from the communists in terms of the class struggle. Because there's really nothing about class in this movie at all. Umberto has no friends. The closest thing that he has to a friend is Maria, who is the servant in the apartment building and very much under the heel of the landlady. And there is a friendship there between them. Maria is played by a non-actor called Maria Pia Casilio, and she gives a wonderful performance in this film. It's a miserable life for her. The apartment, the kitchen, is infested with ants, as is Umberto's apartment room. She is at the beck and call of the landlady, who is not nice to her and resents the fact very much that she is friendly with Umberto. And Umberto is talking to her, and she asks, do you see anything? And he says, no, what am I expected to see? And she says that she is 3 months pregnant. And Umberto, as previously mentioned, is a conservative man, and he is scandalized by this. He says, my God, and you say it just like that? And she says, how do you want me to say it? Even worse, she doesn't know who the father is. There are 2 candidates who are both soldiers. One of them is tall, and one of them is short, and one of them is from Naples, and one of them is from Florence. Now, Umberto, I'll say this. I think it was Samuel Johnson, or perhaps it was Richard Ingram. Sometimes I confuse them. Once said that it is difficult for a sick man to be a good man. The reason being that sickness leads one to an obsession with oneself. And similarly, I would say that it is difficult for a poor man, especially a destitute man, to be a good man. Because again, the concentration is relentlessly on yourself and your own condition. Now, things do not look good for Maria. She is unable to browbeat either of the 2 suitors into marrying her. Now, Umberto promises to her that he's going to sort this out, but he does not. And she says that as soon as the landlady finds out that I'm pregnant, I'm going to be sacked. And Umberto says, can't you go back to your home village? And she says, my father would beat me. So we see that Maria's problems are just as substantial as Umberto's, but Umberto is a selfish man, and he likes to just complain about his condition rather than do anything about it. We meet in the course of this film a number of people that it's clear were former colleagues of his, and they are all quite genial with him. And it is also clear that the nature of the conversation is such that Umberto D is letting them know in an indirect fashion that he is in a desperate position and he needs a loan or a gift. But he never says it directly. And so it's easy enough for his former colleagues just to get on their bus or whatever and pretend that they don't know what the score is. Similarly, later in the film, we see a number of beggars in the film. And we see amusingly, I have 2 children. No, I have 7 dependents, whatever. They're just constantly lying, making up any sad story. Now, prospect of a man, I don't know, like a 65-year-old man in his late 60s, being reduced to beggary is clearly one that would touch the hearts of a lot of people. And Umberto finds himself finally reduced to that. He puts his hand out, and then he's practicing a gesture, and someone sees it and is about to drop some money in his hand. And then he famously, one of the most famous shots of this film, he turns his hand like this and looks away, that he won't be reduced to that. Now, he sells some things that he owns, but he is still 2,000 lira short of his rent. And the landlady makes it clear on several occasions that she will accept all of it or none of it. In any event, as it turns out, it wouldn't have made any difference because the landlady, who is now a grande dame, or so she sees it, is going to extensively remodel the apartment. And we see later on that she has knocked out, or is beginning to knock out, one of the walls of Umberto's apartment in order to make a large living room. So the attempts to raise money would be fruitless. Besides the friendship with Maria, which is, as I say, very one-sided, Umberto has one friend, and that is his dog, Flake. And Flake was played by a professional dog named Napoleone. And this is one of the perhaps the greatest dog performances in cinema history. Flake is a small dog, a terrier mix. And Flake is, as Umberto says, if you knew my dog, you'd know that no one could hate it, because the landlady hates the dog. And at one point attempts to, let it run out of the apartment so that you never have to see it again. Flake is a remarkably well-behaved dog. There's a contrast with a bulldog later in the film. This dog won't stop barking. Flake makes hardly any noise at all, and despite being a terrier, is not hyperactive. Flake sits or lies down quietly, making no noise, not making a fuss. Flake also knows a number of tricks as well. An absolutely delightful dog, and truly no one could hate this dog. And it seems that the only thing that is keeping Umberto D going is the affection that he has for this animal. He gets sick. He comes down with a fever. And there is a quite a harrowing scene where we see him attempting to go to sleep at night, and he's pretty much self-diagnosed what is the problem with him, which is tonsillitis. And we see him sweating profusely. He's wearing his clothes, and he's covered with all these blankets and a coat. And there is a party. The landlady is having a soiree with singing. And he falls asleep finally, or passes out, and then is awakened by some noise from the other room, and on and on and on. And his life has been reduced to such a state that he can't even sleep anymore. He has himself taken to a hospital, a charity hospital. Previously, we'd seen him at a charity diner where the down and out get free food, and he's most concerned at getting the food for Flike, which is not allowed, but he does it anyway. He becomes very good at hiding Flike, and Flike is a very well-behaved dog and doesn't give himself away. So we see him in this Catholic charity hospital, and he makes the acquaintance of someone in the next bed who says that this place is better than a hotel, and if the nuns like you, then you can stay longer. Perhaps you could stay for a week. The doctors say that tonsillectomy is out of the question because of your age. We're just going to paint your tonsils with iodine. And so there's a jolly nun, very kind woman. We see her making the rounds, doling out food. And the fellow in the other bed says, ask for a rosary. Ask for a rosary. If you ask for a rosary, then she'll like you better. And he asks for a rosary. And the nun smilingly pulls one out of her pocket. She's very pleased with him. And he takes the rosary. Later, when the nun leads the recitation of the rosary, the fellow in the other bed takes part, but Umberto insists upon, complaining about his situation. He gets a visit from Maria, and again, we get more complaints, and it's rather heartbreaking that Umberto doesn't seem to be able to fully, understand that the plight that this young woman is in. So Umberto is going to be kicked out. There's no question about it. So he flees, and he takes a suitcase with some of his possessions. He leaves the rest, and he tells Maria that she can have them. So he has his suit, his tie, and his hat, and a suitcase, small suitcase with a few things in it, and his dog and a leash. And that's what he's been reduced to, but he will be reduced to less than that. It is again heartbreaking when he leaves and he lies to Maria saying that, we'll see each other again, and I found a place, it's not far away. And she sees through this, and she asks whether they will ever see each other again, because he is the only friend that she has. And there's a very sad shot after he's got on a bus, and we see him leaving the neighborhood. We see her up on the third floor, looking out down on him, and she realizes that it's the last time that she will ever see him. So he finds a place that boards dogs, and he doesn't really like the look of these people. He has his 13,000 lira. He doesn't like the look of these people, and he suggests that they're going to, kill his dog. Previously, he'd come back from the hospital and the dog was gone. The landlady had let it out. The dog had run away and presumably been captured by the dog catchers. And we see what happens to dogs that don't get claimed. They are gassed. And we see a scene of a man who has to choose. It's 450, once they get into the kennel, it's 450 lira to get the dog back, or we're going to gas your dog. And the question is, can he afford it? And but luckily, Umberto manages to find Flake before he is put into one of the gassing cages. And at the end of the movie, we see him taking Flake to a park. And we see him attempting to give Flake away to a little girl, one of the children of the woman mentioned at the beginning, who was a part-time prostitute. And she's delighted by this dog, and who wouldn't be, but her nanny says, no, dogs are dirty, and we're going to have to do all the work, and you're not going to do any of the work, etc., etc. And no, you can't have the dog. And we've already seen Umberto entertain the thought of suicide, and then it seems as if that he is determined to do so. And so he heads towards the train tracks, but Flake is absolutely terrified by the noise of the train, which is only a couple of feet away, and leaps from his arms. And poor Umberto has managed to alienate Flake, the only friend he has in the world, and he strives to win back Flake's affection. And I won't spoil the ending for you, except to say that the happiest that we have seen Umberto is at the end of the film. This film has been accused of sentimentality, particularly with regard to Flake. I don't think that is true. Umberto is not a sympathetic character as others might have made him. He is certainly not as sympathetic as the father in Bicycle Thieves. And Umberto D has been called a tearjerker. Well, as far as that goes, it is not in the same category as Bicycle Thieves. I think it would be a rare person who saw Bicycle Thieves and wasn't reduced to tears. But De Sica and his writer Sabatini, they were interested in showing how life was. Not how life was for everyone, because that's impossible, but about one man who, through a set of circumstances, which is partly his fault and partly not his fault, finds himself reduced to a penury. There's no finger pointing. There's no shaking of fists. There's no political points made. There's simply a rather dispassionate depiction of Umberto's life and his milieu. And I think this makes it all the more powerful. This movie is available from the Criterion Collection in North America, Region A locked. And it is a fine presentation, I must say. It's up to typical Criterion standards. It has, it's a lovely cover shot. And extras, let's see, it has a bunch of them. It has a 55-minute Italian television documentary about the life of Vittorio De Sica. And it has a printed essay and some comments or critical works on Vittorio De Sica by Umberto Eco and Carlo Battisti and Luisa Alessandri. Now, there is a British Region 2 only Blu-ray, which is produced by Cult Films, which is a company I'd never heard of. DVD Beaver rates it very highly. It has only one extra, but it's quite a substantial one. Vittorio D, a tribute to multi-awarded maestro filmmaker De Sica, a milestone of cinema history with participation from the likes of Clint Eastwood, Ken Loach, Mike Lee, etc. And that is 1 hour and 36 minutes long. This is really a treasurable movie. And I think it is one of the greatest films ever made. So those are my thoughts on Umberto D. Does KMG think Fellini is degenerate, says Chogokin 666. There's a vulgarity in Fellini's films I find off-putting. Perhaps I'm a prig. But what? Yeah, I like the way that the English, not the Americans, translate I Vitelloni. The British translate it as spivs, which is a excellent a title. My Trail of Disgrace says it was more cute, but I liked Cave of the Yellow Dog for setting. British region comes with Italian suit. Hauper says this reminds me of Amoris Paros, a movie about how dogs figure into various people's lives. There's been some controversy about the name of this dog, but there's no question, if you listen to the soundtrack, the Italian soundtrack, that the dog's name is Flake. It doesn't sound like an Italian name, not to me or anyone else, or to Quachalango in the chat, but that is very definitely what the dog is called. Quachalango says KMG should do some Mexican movies. Well, I'll look into that. The fellow who does the Supernatural fellow with the beard, does he have glasses too? Much praised. I can't remember his name offhand. He's a shitlib, and I don't like him. Quachalango says, chat in low gear. Anyway, KMG, enjoyed your Eno segment last night, even though I missed it live. Manzanera definitely had a couple of good 70s albums, and coincidentally listened to Breyer's full length. Oh. Colin Colenso says, Amy Schumer's performance in Trainwreck gives Rin Tin Tin a run for his money. Hard to be bad when sick. I disagree. Oh, I don't quite get that. Okay. I imagine people wanted larger than life, says Quachalango. Well, this was a reason given for the poor box office performance of Umberto D, that the war ended 7 years ago, and we don't want to think about the bad times anymore. I mean, of course, Umberto D is not a message film, but obviously it took Italy a long time to recover from the war. So it was still the bad times for a lot of Italians. Okay. Burkin Sultanov says, when blacks rioted in London 10 years ago, the Turkish store owners came out on the street with their huge kebab knives and waited. As they approached, they lunged at them and chased them out. Ogan's Iron says, makes me laugh that Africans from Mali, etc., act like tough guys in France and elsewhere, yet white Moors in Mauritania still treat them like chattel. Chinatown isn't a Jack Nicholson movie. He is great in it, but never over the top. I would say it is definitely a Jack Nicholson movie. He tells some dirty joke, in the middle of the film or whatever, and it's clear by that time that he has completely taken over the movie. Okay. Kontiki realizes apparently they don't issue birth certificates in Africa. Nobody knows their birth date. A black African guy told me that while we watched a giant 8-year-old African kid playing soccer against our kids. Yes, in Somalia, to give one example, everyone's birthday is January the 1st, just like racehorses. Yeah, it's true. Because I don't know, there's a level of civilizational sophistication that, is necessary for such records to be kept. No, we have no idea. We have no idea who these people are. We were told that the 9/11 hijackers, we were told that they were Saudis. Well, here's the thing. The chances of being accepted entry, into the United States, much, much better if you can claim that you're a Saudi. We really don't know anything about these people, which is a good reason why they should never have been admitted. So that is the show for today. I will be back tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I would appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. On the book club tomorrow, I'm going to be discussing an excellent book, which should be mandatory reading for all of those who support so-called harm reduction, because harm reduction doesn't. It's called Romancing Opiates by Theodore Dalrymple. On Theater Thursday next week, I'm going to be talking about a war movie classic from John Ford from 1945, starring John Wayne, They Were Expendable. And on Music Monday next week, I'm going to be talking about the life and death, or rise and fall, of art rock. If you would like to make a donation to the live stream, which would be just the thing right now for me, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.